This is a University of Otago podcast.
Good evening. My name is Harleen Hain, and I am the Vice-Chancellor here at the University of Otago. And by way of introduction this evening, I want to tell you a little story that I told the students that I met with last week. Last week, we had the great opportunity to welcome our brand new scholarship recipients here to the University of Otago, and there were literally hundreds of them. And over a series of successive evenings, we held functions in the council chamber where we invited these recipients to come and meet the senior members of the University of Otago, both the professoriate and members of the senior executive team. And we gave them the chance not only to meet us, but more importantly, to meet each other. And during these great scholarship events, we wore academic regalia. Now, part of the reason is so that we stood out from them, and they knew who we were. But I explained to the students during my introductory remarks to them that these strange clothes have medieval origins, and that this is the way that professors used to dress when they spoke in the classroom. But nowadays, in the 21st century, this kind of academic regalia is reserved for special occasions. So I told the students that if they ever happened to see us wearing these kinds of clothes, that it was a very clear signal that something important was about to happen. So tonight, once again, we're wearing academic regalia, and something important is about to happen. As a community, we have all gathered together here to celebrate a very important milestone in Stuart Young's career. Tonight, we are here to celebrate his promotion to professor. Now, in addition to the important clothing that some of us are wearing, a number of important people have also gathered here this evening. As is typical for our inaugural professorial lectures, I see a fantastic representation of both staff and students and university council members who have joined us this evening. I know that there are also members of the wider Dunedin community here this evening, particularly people from the theatre community, and I warmly welcome each and every one of you. But the other group of people that I would like to acknowledge and welcome this evening are people who are important in Stuart Young's life. So I know that his partner, Mr. Neil Maines, is here this evening, as well as his sister Christine and his brother-in-law who have come here from Paris, and his friends Brent, Jane, and Debbie who are here from Wellington. So, what is so important about Professor Young's achievements to date? Well, first, he is an outstanding researcher. His work has been published in the most selective, preeminent journals in his field. He is also an accomplished scriptwriter and director. Stuart is also a very effective and popular teacher. He's shown outstanding leadership in the development of new honors and undergraduate courses in his department, as well as an increase in the number of summer school offerings from theatre as well. And his service to the theatre program here at Otago and to theatre in New Zealand more generally has been exemplary. So on behalf of the University of Otago, Stuart, I warmly congratulate you on your promotion to professor. It is an honor that has been extremely well earned. I will now call on your colleague, Hilary Halba, to tell us just a little bit more about your own history and something about your lecture this evening. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I was extremely honoured and rather nervous to have been asked to introduce you this evening to my colleague, Professor Stuart Young. So a little bit about Stuart's history. After completing a master's degree at Victoria University of Wellington, Stuart tells me it was an MA Honours, which confuses people, the title, not the actual thesis that he wrote. But it was an MA Honours that he was awarded at Victoria University of Wellington. After that, Professor Young undertook postgraduate study at Cambridge University, where he was awarded his PhD for a thesis entitled Chekhov on the British Stage, Reactions to a Theatrical Tradition. After teaching in the UK, Professor Young returned to New Zealand to take up a position at the University of Auckland. in 2006, we were fortunate that Professor Young was appointed Associate Professor of Theatre Studies here at Otago. Professor Young convened our Theatre Studies program for 7 years, and he has recently been appointed the Head of Music, Theatre and Performing Arts Studies. Professor Young had made a significant contribution to fields of scholarly endeavour, including textual and critical analysis, especially of modern British drama and queer drama in theatre. He also has made his mark in the analysis, production, reception, and translation of Chekhov for the British stage and beyond. As I said, Professor Young is a distinguished translator of Chekhov. His careful and readily playable translations give Chekhov a modern flavour and are extremely actor-friendly. It's no surprise then that these translations have received productions, most notably in New Zealand at Wellington Circa Theatre, where one reviewer praised the translation of Uncle Vanya by the, quote, excellent Stuart Young. Another reviewer stated, this is a slightly longer quote, Stuart Young's translation brings the text trippingly to the tongue and easily to the ear, placing no impediments in the way of our access to the states of mind and emotions of the characters and the circumstances that afflict them. And for an actor, that's an incredibly important thing to do. Additionally, Professor Young is a theatre director, having helmed productions in Auckland and Dunedin, and including an exemplary production of Martin Krimt's Attempts on Her Life with senior theatre studies students at Allen Hall in 2013. And some of you might have been fortunate enough to have seen that fabulous production that really inspired us, but also really made us think. Professor Young has a distinguished publication record with articles in Modern Drama, Theatre Journal, New Theatre Quarterly, Australasian Drama Studies, New Zealand Slavonic Journal, and the Journal of Dramatic Theory and Criticism, as well as other serials and books. Professor Young is a long-standing and prominent member of the International Federation of Theatre Research, where he co-convenes the Translation, Adaptation and Dramaturgy Working Group. He's also a member of the governance body of the community arts group Talking House, and he was also a Board of Trustees member at the Fortune Theatre for a number of years. So now you've got a very clear idea of the kind of research and community activity that Stuart does. I can also attest to the fact that he is a terrific teacher and a wonderful colleague. So I am very honoured to introduce to you my colleague, mentor, research partner, artistic collaborator and friend, the excellent Stuart Young.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Vice-Chancellor and Hilary, for your very gracious and warm words. And thank you all very much for coming to hear these words. Theatre studies is a relatively new discipline in the Academy, especially in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Many of us, particularly those of a certain age, who teach and research in theatre studies, have come to it by another route. My formative training was in languages and literature at Victoria University in Wellington, where I studied French and more particularly Russian. Fortuitously, both the French and Russian departments at Victoria were not only very strong in literature, they included colleagues with a particular interest in drama and theatre. So I took courses in classical and modern French drama, and as well as studying the wealth of Russian drama of the 19th and the early 20th centuries, I explored the remarkable Russian and Soviet theatrical avant-garde, Meyerhold, Yevrenov, Vakhtangov, and so on. Alongside these studies, I took 2 courses offered by the fledgling drama program run by David Carnegie and the charismatic Phil Mann. Phil and David pioneered the teaching of theatre studies in New Zealand, along, of course, with our own Lisa Warrington here at Otago. My doctoral studies represented a way of combining my training in and passion for theatre and Russian. And that project instigated what has remained a central focus of my research: the production, reception, and rewriting of Russian drama, especially Chekhov's plays, primarily in Britain, but also elsewhere, including Aotearoa. I embarked on my doctorate at Cambridge in the Department of Slavonic Studies. However, the department and my initial supervisor had little idea what to do with either me or my topic. And I was fortunate to be taken on by a young lecturer in English, Peter Holland, who was quickly establishing himself as a leading authority on Shakespeare. Peter was seen by some as the unanointed successor to Raymond Williams, the recently retired professor of drama at Cambridge, who, as many of you will know, was an extremely influential figure in laying the foundations of cultural studies. Because he was particularly interested in Shakespeare in performance, Peter helped me to develop a frame and a language for the kind of research which I was doing, and for which there were few precedents. Another very influential and supportive figure who generously acted as an informal mentor during my doctoral studies and who subsequently continued to assist me with aspects of my research was Patrick Miles, a scholar and theatre translator with a particular interest in Chekhov and a compendious knowledge of his plays on the British stage. You might note those Chekhovian goatees. I have never presumed to imitate. Although initially deeply wary of Anton Chekhov's plays because of their alleged gloominess and alien temperament, the English soon overcame their resistance to adopt those plays with an alacrity and a reverence that have been unmatched by any other receiving theatre worldwide. Chekhov's plays were quickly deemed eminently preferable to those of his compatriots, Lev Tolstoy and Maxim Gorky, who, to quote the British critics of the time, leave no element of the nauseous neglected in parading the revolting details of Russian lower-class life. A hideous medley of swinish drunkenness and satyr-like lust and fiendish crime, a spectacle so disgusting that those critics had to avert their eyes and hold their noses, feeling after seeing Tolstoy's and Gorky's plays that they ought to go into quarantine. On the other hand, English actors and audiences found it much easier to relate to Chekhov's urbane and feckless Russian gentry and upper middle classes. In an astonishingly short time, his quartet of great plays secured a place in the British classical theatre second only to Shakespeare. And of course, you can all name those plays, can't you? Who should I pick on? Well, to save myself the distress of discovering that the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Humanities can't name them, there they are for you. Because the 1917 revolution had swept away not only Tsarism, but the sensibility associated with pre-revolutionary Russia, the English duly presumed that they had become the true guardians and interpreters of the plays. And they even saw the Moscow Art Theatre's productions, which visited London in 1958, as proof of that presumption. Chekhov's plays are revived in Britain with extraordinary frequency, sustaining runs in the commercial West End much more often than Shakespeare's plays. And that's thanks to the successive generations of British acting royalty that line up to perform the cherished roles. During the 1990s, one commentator remarked that revivals of Chekhov's plays were reaching almost epidemic proportions. More remarkable than the frequency of productions is the pronounced hegemony of British Chekhov tradition, laid down by, among others, the Russian émigré director Fyodor Komisarjevsky and such actors as John Gielgud. the British have defined the plays essentially as naturalism without politics, understanding them to be primarily concerned with character, with exploring the workings of the human heart. Despite dutifully preserving the play's period setting, productions almost consistently fail to explicate the social and economic context of Chekhov's world, and they tend to miss the dispassionate forensic diagnosis that Chekhov, as a doctor and scientist, applies to his characters, instead sentimentalizing them. There is a deep irony in this ossifying of Chekhov. As a playwright, he was deeply conscious of rewriting the laws of drama, of, as he puts it, playing fast and loose with stage conventions. That mission is identified with the young playwright Constantine in The Seagull, who in the opening scene prepares the stage for a performance of a play that he's written. As he does so, he denounces the contemporary theatre as riddled with clichés and issues his clarion call: we need new forms. And if we don't get those new forms, we're better off with no theatre at all. In charting the establishment and consolidation of British Chekhov tradition, I have been especially interested in notable attempts to challenge and reform that tradition, as well as in innovative stagings of other Russian drama. This includes looking at adventurous rewritings and reimaginings of the plays, and a variety of theatrical projects that use Chekhov's plays as a point of departure. All this means that although Chekhov and Russian drama may be the ostensible subject of my research, in fact, that research has focused very much on modern British drama and theatre, on what British interventions in staging Chekhov reveal about the adoptive theatrical culture, including the history and repertoires of key institutions, such as the National Theatre and the Royal Court Theatre, the practice of notable directors, for instance, Richard Eyre and Max Stafford Clark, and the work of leading playwrights, including Trevor Griffiths, Timberlake Wurtenbaker, David Hare, and Martin Crimp. So my research involves various intersecting or overlapping circles. Another of those significant overlapping areas is translation studies, which has developed into an important academic field in the last half-century. Translation theory provides the lens through which much of my work on the transmission and reproduction of Russian drama has been framed. Within translation studies, for a long time, the area of translating for the stage remained neglected in comparison with other literary forms, not simply because drama tends to be the poor relation in relation to prose and poetry, but because the theatre is a peculiar beast that complicates considerably the issues pertaining to the practice of translation. Of course, translating a play means confronting many of the same linguistic and other considerations as translation of any other literary genre: semantic issues, imagery and symbols, tone, tropical allusions, and cultural details. But translating drama also involves a variety of considerations specific to performance. Not just what is said, but how it is said. The rhythm, the intonation, the pitch of lines. And the theatre translator must be aware of the non-verbal kinesic dimension, the things done. Because as Lauren Kruger observes, in the theatre, the translation reaches the audience via the actors' bodies. For me, the theatre is an exemplary site for examining translation's complex web of competing responsibilities to the source text and the target culture. It demonstrates quintessentially that translation is not an activity that takes place between two languages, but is an interaction between two cultures. For many of us in theatre studies, theory is necessarily imbricated in practice. So alongside my research on the theatrical adventures of others, I have undertaken my own playful adventures. As a consequence of my transferring to work under Peter Holland's supervision at Cambridge, I emerged with a PhD in English, not Russian. Although that was utterly immaterial to me at the time, it proved most fortuitous when I applied for a position at the University of Auckland. Those making the appointment on behalf of the Department of English were very concerned to ensure that I wasn't a Russianist in disguise. Although those who employed me at Auckland undoubtedly conceived my role and scholarship in rather conventional literary academic terms, I was able to plot a rather different route. As part of my research and publications on Chekhov's dramaturgy, on Russian and British drama and theatre, on translation theory and practice, on queer and gay drama, and on New Zealand theatre, I have pursued projects that include practice in a variety of forms. That dimension of my work was encouraged, facilitated, and enormously enriched by one particular colleague at Auckland, Murray Edmund, who at the time I joined the university was responsible for running the Diploma in Drama, a one-year graduate training course that had been established by Mervyn Thompson. An enduring pleasure and privilege of my time at the University of Auckland was the series of collaborations that I undertook with Murray. Perhaps the most significant of those projects was VANYA on Shortland Street, a production of Chekhov's Uncle Vanya, which Murray and I co-directed. Although an intimation to the long-running New Zealand television soap opera is not inappropriate, the production's title makes two much more important allusions. It invokes Louis Malle's sublime film, VANYA on 42nd Street, which recreates and pays homage to Andre Gregory's 1991 New York stage production of Uncle Vanya. And the title alludes to the venue for our production, the principal broadcasting studios in Auckland, which were built on Shortland Street in the central city in 1935, and which the University of Auckland had recently acquired for the performing arts and for film production. The first major production in the magnificent refurbished Studio One, VANYA on Shortland Street was conceived as a tribute both to the history of that splendid building and to the tradition of radio drama in this country. It presented Uncle Vanya as if it were being recorded for a radio broadcast in 1947. Although VANYA on Shortland Street offered some insight into the nature of theatre in mid-20th century New Zealand, its principal thrust was to comment self-reflexively on the prevailing mimetic tradition of Chekhov production that has become firmly established, in particular in both Britain and New Zealand, a tradition that two recent productions of Uncle Vanya in Auckland had conveniently exemplified. The frame of the radio recording, which meant in effect that Uncle Vanya was played as a play within a play, facilitated an emphatic repudiation of the scenic naturalism with which Chekhov has been synonymous since Stanislavski's seminal productions in the late 1890s and early 1900s. It also enabled us to heighten the comedy and intensify the farce. And it served to highlight what I regard as a central theme of the play, indeed of Chekhov's drama generally, self-dramatization. The 1940s setting helped to facilitate this. The acting and costumes evoked Hollywood film personae such as Bogart and Bacall. The touches of self-conscious posing, self-ironizing, and mock melodrama worked both to capture the attractiveness of Chekhov's characters and to invite the audience to view those characters with some critical detachment. As you might expect, sound effects and their creation featured conspicuously in the mise-en-scène. According to the conventions of radio drama, most of those sounds were separated from their ostensible source in the world of the play, and they were generated mostly by the Foley artist, or spot man, who was positioned on a platform high above the stage and who contributed significantly to the show's theatricality. For Chekhov aficionados among us, this overt attention to sound was an ironic allusion to the elaborate soundscapes which Stanislavski created so painstakingly for his productions and which so exasperated Chekhov. I'm just going to play you a short clip. It's not, was recorded rather crudely on video, which has now been digitized, but it will give you some idea of the effects that were created.
Silence, pen scratching, crickets chirping.
As well as directing VANYA on Shortland Street, I translated Chekhov's play for the production. It's one of several translations of Russian and French drama that I've produced. Two of them have been staged here at Allen Hall. And this brings me to my particular bête noire that has long irked me in my work in translation studies and as a translator. The remarkable, indeed scandalous disregard among New Zealand theatre directors and producers, esteemed present company accepted, of course, the scandalous disregard for the whole issue of translation and the staging of foreign drama. This is exemplified by the history of Chekhov production in Aotearoa, where some directors, including the artistic director of what is widely seen as the country's leading theatre company, have shamelessly cobbled together a script from a range of existing translations, even inviting actors to pick and choose from those various versions. Meanwhile, the default practice is to use British translations, sometimes unacknowledged, presumably to avoid paying royalties, seemingly oblivious to the fact that those English translations are inevitably inscribed with all the hallmarks and ideological assumptions of British Chekhov. In other words, in Aotearoa, we have long viewed Chekhov filtered through a very English lens. So to Constantine's call for new forms, I add, we need new translations. We need our own versions of these foreign plays. So it gave me great satisfaction when in 2005, Circa Theatre staged my translation of The Cherry Orchard, which I produced for them entirely on spec. They made no undertaking to use the translation while I was actually doing it. But of course, the novelty of a local translation provided a very useful angle for publicity. And 2 years later, Circa commissioned me to provide a translation of Uncle Vanya. Since I have been at Otago, I have embarked on an altogether new avenue of research that's suggested by the last part of the title of this lecture. In the process, I have framed the intersection between practice and what we conveniently think of as scholarly research in more explicitly academic terms, what is now known as performance as research. Performance as research is an increasingly influential paradigm of theatre scholarship, whereby research questions are tested through practical investigation and findings demonstrated in both performance and scholarly commentary. Work that we have been doing in theatre studies at Otago has been instrumental in pioneering this form of scholarship in Aotearoa. And I mean not only the research projects themselves, but I want to acknowledge Dr. Suzanne Little's work in the scholarly articulation of the philosophy and principles of performance as research. After seeing Tectonic Theatre Company's The Laramie Project in New York in 2000, and then during periods of research and study leave in London in 2004 and 2007, I became deeply engaged by a new form of theatre, documentary theatre, sometimes called fact-based theatre or theatre of the real. During the last 15 to 20 years, documentary theatre has become a major and exciting strand of theatre internationally, especially in Europe and the United States. Documentary theatre makers create plays from a wide range of archived material and testimony, sometimes from the public record, sometimes from interviews they conduct, and they represent that material in a variety of theatrical ways, such as reconstructions of events, tribunal plays, promenade and site-specific productions. They often aim to generate greater understanding of particular issues, to open up debate, and even to motivate spectators to respond actively. My journey from Chekhov to the theatre of the real is perhaps not as unlikely as it might seem. In pioneering a new approach to dramaturgy, Chekhov famously insisted that everything on the stage must be just as complex and at the same time just as simple as in life, and that plays must be written not according to the way an author wants them to be, but according to the way in which they happen in life. The British actor and playwright Robin Soames testifies eloquently to the power of documentary theatre when describing his first role in a verbatim play. In all my years of acting, I had hardly ever had such keen attention paid to me. You could have heard a pin drop. This was obviously a potent and relevant form of theatre, and I wanted to know more. The audience was paying a different kind of attention to this play. Soames contrasts his experience with that performing at the National Theatre, where he says a large proportion of the audience seemed to view the acting with a disinterested detachment, a metaphorical awarding of marks, like a panel of judges at an ice skating competition. Soames is describing precisely my own experience at the time. For alongside those fascinating documentary plays, I was continuing my dutiful evaluation of Chekhov and other productions, too many of which epitomise the kind of cliché-riddled theatre that Constantine bemoans in The Seagull. I too then felt compelled to pay those new documentary plays the keen and different kind of attention that Soames experienced. I duly embarked on writing about notable exponents of the genre, but like Soames, I wanted to explore it through practice. Moreover, I thought it important to introduce the form to New Zealand, where, apart from some work by Miranda Harcourt, it was conspicuously absent. I wanted to engage with the methods and practices used in creating documentary theatre, as well as with the contingent philosophical and ethical issues that were being debated internationally. The terms of appointment here at Otago require confirmation path, that is tenure track staff, to apply for research grants. As one of 4 recent appointments and the head of a newly resourced theatre program, I felt it behoved me to signal to the university that the research we do can take very different forms, and that our research isn't necessarily a matter of working in archives and libraries. Here was the vehicle to test the university's receptivity to performance as research. And as well as resources, of course, I needed collaborators. I started by approaching Hilary Halber, and bless her, she agreed. And bless them, the University of Otago gave us a major research grant. Of course, not nearly as much as we needed, but it was the first of 3 such grants, and they got more generous. That was the start of the exhilarating adventures into documentary theatre that I have undertaken over the past 8 years, with Hilary and with an increasing number of theatre practitioners in Dunedin and beyond, including senior students and alumni of theatre studies. Bella Merlin, whose publications on Stanislavski and acting some of you may know, has been a researcher and actor on a number of documentary theatre projects. Among the reasons she cites for undertaking this work is that it is the ultimate in collaboration. That has been my experience too. So I want to pay tribute to my collaborators, above all to Hilary Halber, whom I can never honour adequately for her creativity and inspiration, and for the joy that our collaboration has given me. I also want to acknowledge those with whom I've worked in different combinations on the research and creation of 5 plays, most especially Simon O'Connor and Cindy Diver. Also, Erica Newlands, Danny Still, and Susie Lawless. Simon, Cindy, Erica, and Danny have also acted in 2 or more of our plays. The dramaturg, Fiona Graham, Martin Roberts, who has designed all of our productions, Claire Adams and Karen Elliott, who have been actors, come producers, come tour managers, and all the other actors, technicians, stage managers who include the names on the screen. It's lovely to see some of those people here today. I'm profoundly grateful to you all for your remarkable generosity and consummate artistry. There is, of course, one other group whose participation is the crucial factor in making this work the ultimate in collaboration. Those people who have generously and sometimes very courageously provided us with the stories and the testimony that are the substance of our plays. Those plays include 2 works with senior students, gathering confidence about what frightens you and what comforts you, and passages about rites of passage and personal turning points in people's lives. Hush, a play about family violence. Belonging, which looks at the experiences of migrants settling or unsettling in Aotearoa. And The Keys Are in the Margarine, a project which was initiated and driven by Cindy Diver and Susie Lawless, and for which I was a writer and director. Thanks to substantial grants from Creative New Zealand, under the auspices of Dunedin's Talking House, we have toured Hush, Belonging and Keys to other centres in New Zealand. Belonging actually premiered in Auckland at the New Performance Festival, a festival devoted to boundary-smashing New Zealand and international theatre, at which we were invited to present our work. And when we were in Wellington last November, Belonging was recorded for broadcast by Radio New Zealand. Given my reference to radio drama in relation to VANYA on Shortland Street, there was a rather sad irony in this recording. It seems to be the very last such recording by Radio New Zealand because of budgetary cuts. But that recording has yet to be broadcast, so you may still hear it. As well as raising the profile of documentary and verbatim theatre nationally, in theatre studies we've had 3 postgraduate candidates doing performances research documentary projects, and graduates have gone on to create other work professionally. Jackie Shaw and Victoria Abbott actually established a documentary theatre company, Bear Hunt Collective, which has produced 3 well-regarded plays, most notably Munted, about the Christchurch earthquakes. And Jess Green has created plays in Dunedin and Wellington. You'll have noticed that we attach the label verbatim to our plays, a term that is used commonly and sometimes very loosely in the United Kingdom. We use it because all our plays are created entirely from testimony that we have gathered in interviews. Hush, for example, comprises the stories of people who have experienced family violence as victims and or perpetrators, as well as commentaries by representatives of agencies that deal with family violence and those directly affected by it. With these plays, we have pioneered a particular form of verbatim theatre, which extends the practice of leading international innovators and which features complex technological processes, both in the process of writing the plays and in their performance. For many verbatim theatre makers, the testimony comprises what you probably understand by the term: the depositions, the words spoken by the play's subjects. However, for us, the non- or extra-verbal elements, the glances, the gestures, the body language, not to mention vocal inflections and intonation, also constitute the testimony. In our productions, the oral testimony is fed to each actor through earphones. In some of these images, you'll see that the actors operate MP3 players or iPods, which contain the clips of edited testimony that they represent in performance. With those clips playing in their ears, the actors repeat not only their subject's words, but as closely as possible, they replicate the original speaker's accents, inflections, and hesitations. We adopted this device from the practice of ALECKY BLYTHE and her London-based company Recorded Delivery, who have used earphones in a number of productions. However, we have complicated Blythe's method, drawing on the work of the American actor and documentary theatre maker Anna Deavere Smith, known particularly for her virtuosic performances of her solo plays Fires in the Mirror and Twilight Los Angeles 1992. In reenacting some of her subjects, Deavere Smith fabricated gestures and movements, but where she had filmed the interviews, she carefully studied the video recordings in order to impersonate the interviewees physically as accurately as possible in performance. All of our interviews are recorded on camera, so in rehearsal, our actors study the film of those edits painstakingly in order to be able to reproduce as precisely as possible each gesture, facial expression, and involuntary movement that accompanies the original testimony. We're going to illustrate how this works with a scene from Belonging. This scene features A. Ling, played by Nadia Shaw-Bennett. A. Ling is a young woman who migrated to New Zealand from China when she married her New Zealand Chinese husband. She arrived here speaking no English, but now has 2 young children. Also in the scene is Monica, played by Karen Elliott. Monica is a friend who helps A. Ling with her English. And also in the scene is the interviewer, played by Alex Wilson. Please forgive the solipsism.
Some people not understand my English and just I got like a lot of mothers. Some speak English and not understand too.
Oh, really?
So, for me. Now Monica good. Now she can teach me some more English.
Like the different people, different ladies at the play centre.
Yes.
They speak different ways. Some was very clear. Fijian ladies speak different accents, different styles, still English but a different style.
The Fiji, you say Fiji different.
Fijian
She
woman.
speak English, I can understand.
Very clear. Yes,
And
it's very
here
clear.
some white people, ladies speak English. No, understand. Just.
You know, you are having to work quite hard all the time to listen to different accents, different speed, different things. I know sometimes you say you are lazy. Of course that's not true, because you are working, listening, thinking, responding.
It's hard work, listening.
Yeah.
It is. I find that because my assistant in France, so she's French children.
Yes.
And if I'm there, well, most of the time I speak in English, I'm with friends and speaking French.
Yes.
It's very hard, I'm very tired.
Aileen was very kindly teaching me some Mandarin Chinese, but she is intermediate learner of English. I'm a beginner of Mandarin, so she has to be very, very patient.
Yeah, I'm just look at the book. Easy for me. Oh, 好，麻烦你过来。别吵啊，别吵。这个那个，来，这裙子，妈妈帮你脱掉。反正里面还有漂亮裙子去啊。
Good
Come on.
girl.
哎。
Never mind, no problem.
Thank you very much, Nadia, Karen and Alex. They're recreating the performance that they gave on a national tour last year. I should also take this opportunity to thank Alex for doing my PowerPoint for me. My ability to embrace and master new forms has some limitations. The technique sounds easy, doesn't it? The actors don't need to learn their lines, just repeat them. However, as you have seen, the absolute precision and technical discipline that this technique requires is extremely demanding. And this work raises all sorts of questions and issues. Indeed, some of you may be formulating some of those questions right now. From the outset, Hilary's and my adventures in verbatim theatre have been informed by a provocation from Carol Martin, a leading scholar on documentary theatre. She remarks, "At its best, documentary theatre complicates not only the idea of documentary and of the real, but even what it means to document. That is, it troubles our already troubled categories of truth, reality, fiction, and acting. Therefore, our practice has been very much shaped by debates around issues of representation and truth in documentary theatre. Some documentary and verbatim theatre makers contrive to disguise their art by creating an illusion of transparency and seeming merely to record information. We are concerned to create both texts and performances that foreground our interventions." To return to Chekhov for a moment. Although Chekhov insisted that everything on stage should be just as complex and as simple as it is in life, he never wanted to deny that what was happening on stage was constructed. That his plays are generally seen as exemplifying the movement known as naturalism is due largely to Stanislavski's seminal first productions at the Moscow Art Theatre, productions in which the director smothered the plays in naturalistic detail that used to drive Chekhov bananas. Meyerhold, who became one of the first important theatre directors in the early years of the 20th century, and who was among the original company of actors at the Moscow Art Theatre, tells the story of Chekhov's attending a rehearsal of Stanislavski's production of The Seagull. One of the actors proudly informed the playwright that during the play, frogs croaked backstage, dragonflies hummed, and dogs howled. "What for?" asked Chekhov, sounding dissatisfied. "Well, it's realistic," said the actor. "Realistic," Chekhov repeated with a laugh. After a brief pause, he remarked, "The stage is art. In one of Kramskoy's genre paintings, he has the magnificently drawn faces. What if we cut the painted nose from one of these faces and substituted a live one? The new nose would be real, but the painting would be ruined." The explicit presence of the audio technology in the performance of our plays serves not only to honour as completely as possible the testimony and its speakers, it also draws audiences' attention to the processes of construction and mediation involved in representing and representing our subjects and their testimony. This is perhaps most pronounced in Belonging, where, as you saw in the scene just before it was performed, we insert the researcher theatre maker more conspicuously in the frame. Our performance method also raises fundamental and intriguing questions about the art and craft of acting, such as, where is the acting? Where is the actor's craft, the actor's agency? The discipline of strict imitation makes the actor more a technician than an artist. As one of our actors puts it, the performers are like avatars. Of course, at times and in various ways, the theatrical representation of our subject's testimony requires a degree of dilation, verbal articulation or projection, and clear physical definition. Otherwise, however, our technique forbids the actors from colouring their performances with any embellishments. This discipline of precise imitation can be a great challenge, because after all, actors' whole training is designed to equip them to interpret a role and create it expressively, to colour it in. And it can be very tempting to emphasise and enhance our subject's words. Some of the testimony which we recorded for Hush, for instance, was remarkable for their matter-of-fact and emotionally inexpressive delivery of accounts of traumatic incidents of abuse. It seems to beg for accentuation. Ironically, however, ornamenting those accounts not only misrepresents them, it actually proves much less compelling than the understated, measured manner of the original delivery. Of course, Dr. Chekhov long ago diagnosed the error of playing the obvious emotion. when his wife, the actress Olga Knieper, was rehearsing the role of the deeply unhappily married Marcia in his play Three Sisters, he counselled her, "People who have been unhappy for a long time don't go around looking sad all the time. They just whistle." Among other issues raised by this verbatim theatre work that particularly engage me are a wide range of exigent ethical questions. However, don't worry, I shan't rehearse these here except to say that I believe that fact-based or verbatim theatre is an ideal site, not only for examining the ethics of representation and spectatorship, but also for foregrounding and playing out our responsibilities to the other. To return to Chekhov and the quotation in the title of this lecture, what I have not mentioned is that the play Constantine stages in the first act of The Seagull, as part of his advocacy of new theatrical forms, that play is actually not very good. Chekhov uses that play within a play to satirize the experiments of contemporary decadent and symbolist writers. However, that does not invalidate Constantine's criticism of a theatre that has become the vehicle for stale conventions and cliches, and his consequent urgent call for theatrical renewal. And just as theatre must constantly renew itself, so too must scholarship. Performance as research has opened up exciting possibilities, which are being explored with remarkable and impressive imagination and creativity by our postgraduate students and my colleagues. To wit, Martin Roberts' Dark Matter, just represented in Allen Hall as part of the Fringe. Fran Kewenay's My Propeller, which investigates how verbatim theatre can be used to explore issues of hauora, Maori health and well-being. And Emily Duncan's PhD project, which confronts the challenges in writing a play that has, at its narrative centre, a physical site and its histories, taking as its subject the tuberculosis sanatorium turned correctional facility for young men, turned religious retreat centre at Waipiata in the Maniatoto. In the course of this lecture, I have acknowledged those who have been very important in shaping and participating in my research. Among those who have supported me in other profound ways, I want to pay a special tribute to two. First, my sister Christine, who is, of course, the real linguist. Like Lisa Warrington, I developed my theatrical and specifically directorial proclivities in childhood. And just as Lisa used to marshal her brother and sister for her adventures, so for my early theatrical exploits, I recruited Christine. She, of course, was the younger sibling, so she had no choice. Recruited her as well as other neighbourhood children, schoolmates, and even my Form 1 and 2 French teacher, Miss Galbraith, who conveniently played the guitar much better than I did. And we would inflict our extravaganzas on our parents and neighbours. So thank you, Christine, for the compliance and indulgence, and thank you and Rami for being here today. Finally, I owe an incalculable debt to my partner, Neil, who in supporting my career has demonstrated a generosity of which I fear I am not capable. Most significantly, displaying absolutely no hesitation or regrets, he sacrificed both the new career pathway and position that he had recently embarked on in Auckland for us to come to Dunedin, which held no comparable sense of adventure for him because he had come from here. The past 10 years at Otago have been the most fulfilling of my academic career, and I am immensely grateful to you, Neil, to the university, and to all of you, my colleagues, collaborators, students past and present, who have made it so deeply satisfying. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Lisa Warrington. I'm in theatre studies and I'm one of Stuart's colleagues. Just before we started this session, Hilary and I were able to compare notes on what we'd written, and it turns out we have the same quote in our pieces. So if you hear something familiar, don't worry, you're not having a déjà vu episode, okay? I'd like to thank Stuart for his very lively and engaging lecture presentation, and it is my pleasurable duty to make a few brief observations about it. Stuart's research and scholarship is both deep and wide-ranging, as you've heard, beginning with his journey of his twin passions, Slavonic studies and theatre. The inevitable first connection point for those two pathways is that extraordinary Russian dramatist, arguably the greatest of all modern playwrights, Anton Chekhov, for whom I share Stuart's deep and abiding love and affection. Chekhov once wrote, "Knowledge is of no value unless you put it into practice." Stuart's flourishing academic career, alongside his esteemed work as translator, writer, and director, is a clear exemplar of that advice and can be seen, for example, in his translations of Chekhov's plays. Reviews hailed his translation of The Cherry Orchard, circa in 2005, as a triumph of clarity and authenticity, while his version of Uncle Vanya in 2007 elicited the slightly backhanded comment, "The translation is so good that you almost don't notice it." But it also gave rise to Stuart Young's translation brings the text trippingly to the tongue and easily to the ear, placing no impediments in the way of our access to the states of mind and emotion of the characters and the circumstances that afflict them. I've been particularly struck in things that Stuart has said of his mention of the actor's body as a site of meaning, where the translator must take account not only of what is said, but how it is said. Glance, gesture, body language, vocal inflection, intonation. His understanding of the importance of this is part of what makes his translations so strong. He's not afraid to visualize and to utilize the dual languages of theatre, which separate a staged production from a read work. Stuart spoke cogently to you of the ossifying of Chekhov's plays, particularly in some British and New Zealand theatre, to the point where they could perhaps founder under a blanket of cosy predictability. God forbid that we should see the comedy and the sexiness rife in Chekhov's writing, or the characters' human weaknesses, indecision, misplaced longings, and occasional simple idiocy, the stuff of real life. One British director who did everything in his power to end this tyranny of beige Chekhov, was Mike Alfreds, a director on whom Stuart has also written and published. Alfreds uses words such as lyricism, farce, extrovert, fragility, bubbling and flickering, and heightened performance to conjure his ideas of characters in the grip of urgent, frantic passions. We watch them in pity and terror and heave with helpless laughter, as one critic responded. More recently, as you have heard and seen this afternoon, Stuart has turned his attention, alongside colleagues such as Hilary Halber and many others present here today, to documentary or verbatim theatre. And this has resulted in international conference papers, including invitations to be keynote speaker, published articles, and arguably most importantly to a body of dramatic works, as Stuart has shown you today, that explore and celebrate aspects of community. Here, as with his translations of Chekhov, part of the discovery process lies in the recognition of the physical skin of the production as embodied by the actors who represent the voices of the play. Stuart has served with his colleagues in various roles as writer, editor, director, dramaturg, producing work that has been seen up and down the country. It provides a jumping-off point for serious debate about issues which affect every community. As one recent review says, the abiding existential question of identity is profoundly canvassed by belonging. How do we define and judge ourselves and each other? What does it take to make us feel that we belong and for us to help others feel they belong? There is universality in every detail. Verbatim work has also, as Stuart has indicated, evolved a new method of performance, as you've seen and heard today. The kinds of questions that Stuart raises as a result of this method: where is the actor's craft, the actor's agency? What does it mean if a performer is also avatar or performer as avatar? These are questions of scholarly importance in the field of theatre studies, as well as for actors and directors exploring the boundaries and the possibilities of their craft. In conclusion, I would like to formally congratulate Stuart on his well-deserved professorial appointment, and I invite you to join me again in applause.